I think there's a lot of businesses in crypto and a lot of companies in crypto that get excited and lose track of the need to continually innovate on the fundamentals of the space they operate in. And they chase token price, they chase marketing hype, they chase co-marketing announcements. And they don't necessarily say, I got into the space, and this is the state of the art. And as I progress through it, I'm going to move that state of the art forward.
Hey everybody, Tanner here with WAGMI Ventures. On today's episode, we have Ismael Hishon Rezaizadeh, co-founder and CEO at Lagrange Labs. For anyone who's new, this is the WAGMI Ventures podcast where we do snapshots with interesting builders, founders, and investors from across Web3. Check out wagmiventures.io to learn more about the syndicate behind the podcast. But for now, let's get into it with Ismael at Lagrange Labs. All right, what's up, everybody? This is the WAGMI Ventures podcast. I'm Tanner, and I'm here today with Ismael Hishon Rezaizadeh, co-founder and CEO at Lagrange Labs. Ismael, what's up? How are you doing today?
Thank you for having us, Tanner. Very excited to be on the podcast.
Yeah, super pumped. This is going to be an awesome chat. So maybe to start, you've got this really interesting background. So I'd love to maybe learn how your journey has sort of intersected with your crypto journey, professional with crypto. Maybe we could start there.
Yeah. So I actually started my career as a software engineer for a large financial services company based out of the US and Canada, Manulife John Hancock, where I did a lot of digital asset strategy engineering for them, really back during the first DeFi summer. And so I built out the crypto practice at this rather large financial services company, hired a team there. And after a while, I really just didn't feel like the area of digital assets within a very large, more historic financial services company was really the right place to kind of push innovation. And so I went into early stage venture for a SF-based fund, Renegade Partners, during their first fund life cycle, and deployed heavily into SaaS and more sort of Web 2 theses. But then, after a while there, I kind of started to feel like really returning to operating and returning to early stage entrepreneurship was more of sort of the area where I found myself most gravitating. So I left the fund and I started working very early on sort of kind of primitive on-chain contracts to sort of store, catalog, and then query over data structures. And we're working on things like that for UGC and for other just kind of more toy applications on chain. And what we started to really realize early on was that there wasn't really a very strong query language or query ability with on-chain contracts that could really actually iterate or search over any kind of meaningful amount of data, both in current state and historical state on any EVM chains. And so this was where we kind of realized that there was a need for better tools to basically have a contract in the execution environment be able to interact with and run computation over meaningful amounts of state. And so very early on, we kind of started looking at how we could solve this from a research standpoint, and we kind of began to develop some of the early primitives behind zero-knowledge MapReduce and our MapReduce coprocessor and some of the work that we're doing right now.
Okay, awesome. Super interesting. So one thing that's kind of become a bit of a recurring question on this podcast that I've really enjoyed getting to hear answers to is really about like the size of the opportunity. So as you guys are doing this research, how did it become apparent enough that you were bumping up against a big enough problem that it would be warranted or worth making it kind of the most, the next several years, 3, 5, 7 years to kind of dedicate of your professional life to this problem or set of problems?
Well, I hope it's 10 years, but
Nice.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I think one of the things that we often feel when interacting with a lot of early stage operators is a lot of times people get into a company or a startup because they see a solution that they can build that's exciting and that's intellectually curious, intellectually stimulating, and then they pursue it. And they say, I'm going to build this thing, and I'm sure that there's a problem it can solve, and I'm sure that there's something on the other end if I build this and people give me enough money to build it. But we tend not to find that those create the most lasting long-term businesses. What we've found is when you are in the space and you're building and you're bumping up continually against the problems that your technology or your product can solve, then you really have a better ability to approximate the size of the opportunity in front of you. And this is something that very early on with Lagrange, we really began to quantify, where we realized that there's a lot of things you can't do in the execution client or in your contract that you would really be able to in the Web 2 engineering context. And so instead, we started building and generalizing solutions that actually solved the things that we were facing. And the generalization of that and the interaction with other teams let you kind of quantify the size of the problem space and the opportunity ahead of you. When you're out there, you're talking with partners, you're talking with customers, you can start to realize that is this just me facing an issue because maybe I'm not a great engineer, or is this something that's much more large, something that must be much more substantive in a space? And this is what we realized early on with Lagrange.
Very cool. Okay. So let's talk more about Lagrange. If you could maybe just tee us up here, what is Lagrange creating? What are you guys enabling? What are you guys building over there?
Mm-hmm. So the way I like to think about it is there is a certain group of things you can build on-chain today with the security of Ethereum, let's say. You can build them in your smart contract. You can build them with the kind of basic primitive zero-knowledge proofs that you might be able to actually construct over state or construct over some data structure you retain in your contract. But there's kind of just a box of what you can do. You can't, for example, build a whole order book on chain. You can't, for example, build a very data-rich options protocol, a derivatives protocol on chain. And so what we try to do is we try to take what you can build and make it a little bit larger, so that you can now do more on chain, more with your contract, and build new generations of applications that potentially have better user experience, more rich functionality, and better overall security. And how we do that is really through this concept called co-processing. Co-processing means you use the state of the chain that exists that you can access in your execution client, the block header of that chain, and you compute over that in zero knowledge and verify the result of that computation back on chain. Think about this as another way to extend computation over the blockchain itself and over the data of the blockchain. And so we target things that are very large scale and data rich in computation. Think the stuff you do on a database: SQL, MapReduce, Spark, RDD, etc. And so we build proving systems and we build infrastructure that lets you take the state of the chain, generate a proof of a very, very large computation over some subset of data in that chain, and then put that back in your contract and verify that back in your contract. So your contract can do a little bit more now.
Fascinating. Okay. Hey, everybody. Quick thing here. We're excited to announce WAGMI Advisory, your home for all things fundraising, hiring, and partnerships. This is all about supercharging your project with the WAGMI network, consisting of over 20,000 executives, investors, and builders in crypto, all ready to come alongside your project to help it succeed. Get in touch at team@wagmiventures.io to learn more and figure out if WAGMI Advisory is the right fit for your project. Now, let's get back to the show. So I definitely want to talk a little bit more about aspects of that, but I think I'm curious, just as context, just to kind of situate us here, maybe just situating the significance of this. So like, how is this such a stepwise change from how things are usually done, and maybe a little bit more color before, because I do want to ask maybe just about possibilities as you sort of envision them, but maybe just a little bit more detail on like how do you foresee this changing the game a little bit? Like,
This is a really good question. I think the simplest way to look at this in concrete terms is in what you can do today in a little box of things you can do on chain versus what you can do with what we built. And very simple example: imagine you have an NFT contract, Pudgy Penguins, and it stores NFT index owner. And I want to figure out, give me all the NFTs owned by Tanner. How many penguins does he own? Right now, there's no way in Solidity to do that. You'd have to loop through the entire mapping, check every NFT and every owner, and you'd very quickly blow up the gas pump. It would be expensive. But that's a very trivial computation to run. This isn't a database, and I could just run a SQL query over the mapping. I could very quickly determine how many you own. I could very quickly determine which ones you own, which properties they have. But the inability to compute over that state, both within the contract and then both to compose on top of the state from another contract, is a fundamental limitation in the execution environment. And so that's one of the things we can solve, where you can actually start running meaningful computations of the state of a smart contract from other smart contracts or from within your own smart contract. And you can take the data you have there and you can start computing over it as if it was in your database, but verifiably from your contract.
Super interesting. Okay, awesome. So, before we dive even deeper, or maybe as like an avenue to dive a little bit deeper, just in some of the research I was doing, I came across two really interesting recent announcements that I thought could be an interesting lens to explore how you guys are thinking about what you're working on now, and then also
Yeah.
where things are going. And so that first one was regarding state committees on eigenlayer via Lagrange. And then the second was about sort of building a light client for Mantle with Lagrange state committees. And so
Yeah.
I thought this could be an interesting point to sort of dive into, like, what are these state committees? What's happening with these two announcements? Maybe you could talk a little
Yes.
bit about sort of all of that.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. And so what the state committees are is a light client for optimistic rollups that leverages our ZK MapReduce coprocessor in the backend. What these are restaked operators through Eigenlayer who attest to the execution of optimistic rollup blocks and submit those attestations. And across these submitted attestations, we're able to compute very, very large batch proofs of the collective signature weight and economic weight behind the finality of a given block before the fraud-proof window expires. And what this lets us do is to take a certain degree of security on pre-confirmations and provide that to cross-chain protocols who want to originate secure and trustless messages off of optimistic execution spaces. And so in the context of Mantle, one of the ecosystems that we have a great relationship with is at the forefront of embracing a lot of these primitives to increase and continually iterate on the safety of the underlying protocol design. The state committee is a light client for them. Very similar to the Ethereum sync committee and its application to Ethereum, the state committee is a light client for optimistic rollups. What the state committee allows you to do is to now have a secure representation of state that can be consumed by any arbitrary cross-chain protocol that wants it, very simply and very easily. And so Mantle, thankfully, has really been a big supporter of ours in this, and so has Eigenlayer, which is what the state committees are built on top of. And so Mantle has, as of last week, committed $10 million to help us bootstrap the state committee as the light client for Mantle Network. And this is being bootstrapped as an AVS on Eigenlayer.
Fascinating. Okay. Well, I mean, congrats on the $10 million commitment. That's really tremendous. So one recurring question that I always like to ask about this time is as you're aware, right? Like, no project is a perfectly linear path. It's always a little bit, meandering is not the right word, but there's problems to be solved. There's challenges that come up, and the way that certain obstacles are solved or thought about often can shape sort of the path of that project, right? And so I'm always curious to ask, just getting in the weeds a tiny bit about early challenges. Like, how did maybe one or two things that were unexpected that your team had to think about in an interesting way? How did you guys maybe approach those challenges, and how did you think about them?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges early on is really in identifying your identity as a company, or it's about being able to decide what makes Lagrange. And so you have businesses that take very, very different approaches in how they commercialize their core technology and how they build their core technology. And one of the things that very early on we wanted to establish and that we stuck by to date is a strong prioritization of research fundamentals. I think there's a lot of businesses in crypto and a lot of companies in crypto that get excited and lose track of the need to continually innovate on the fundamentals of the space they operate in. And they chase token price, they chase marketing hype, they chase co-marketing announcements, and they don't necessarily say, I got into the space, and this is the state of the art, and as I progress through it, I'm going to move that state of the art forward. And for something that like what Lagrange does, which is a foundational piece of proving infrastructure, it was essential for us early on to establish and maintain that research-driven fundamentals, both in terms of doing research as a company and then formalizing, systematizing, and publishing that research. And so early on, this was a very, I guess it was a very controversial strategy with a lot of early stage funds that we engaged with. And we were very fortunate to find a group of early investors, first rounds led by 1KX, who embraced that strategy and supported us in it, and who genuinely shared the same belief that the advancement of foundational zero knowledge research was going to allow us to succeed long term as a business.
Very cool. Super interesting. Okay. So I'd love to maybe transition here to a couple more general questions, but maybe one last question here on Lagrange that is a little bit more general. But,
yeah,
without naming any names, that's not what this is about. But I'm curious, like you've touched on maybe this category of mistakes or ways people can do things maybe from your perspective less productive way, right? So I'm curious, maybe running with that a little bit. What do you think is maybe the biggest waste of time when building the types of things you're building? Like what traps have you noticed and navigated around that might be valuable for others to be aware of?
Yeah. So what I will never say is waste of time, because I think the journey that an operator takes is one of the things that allows them to reach an end state that's uniquely theirs. But in terms of the things that I have wasted time on, there's a bunch. But I think very early on, when you run a business, you become very susceptible to listening to the voices in the broader space that you should not. And as an operator, the perspective that you should listen to, I think, first and foremost, is your team, and then your investors and your advisors, and then your customers, all kind of in a big blob that you should probably listen to all with the same priority. But that is really how I think you excel long term, by listening to the people who have a vested interest in the success of your business. There's so much noise on Twitter nowadays, especially with the market getting better. And it's so easy to lose sight of the voices that are most important. And as your token becomes liquid, I would add in that a community and ecosystem become incredibly important to listen to as well. But there will always be, the negativity and the negative voices in the space. But what you must do is focus on those who are the fundamental stakeholders in your business. And I think when I see operators running into issues, they tend to allow all the ancillary voices in the space to drive and to mold their product vision into something that it shouldn't be.
Super helpful. Okay. So taking a step back a little bit, like this is kind of an interesting moment in crypto, right? There's a variety of narratives spinning around, and prices are doing what prices are doing. But I guess I'm curious, like, how would you, from your perspective as a founder, narrate or sort of interpret the state of crypto right now, especially given your sort of focus on and vantage point around infrastructure, and maybe connecting it to the narrative of, what are the killer apps going to be for crypto, right? Or for blockchain technology, like as the infrastructure has been developing. And I'm curious, maybe your take on sort of where we're at with that conversation.
Yeah. I think the narratives in this cycle that excite me the most is the modular one, first and foremost, which I think is going to be just an incredible buoying factor in the space, as the cost of block space just decays exponentially, and it becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to deploy a high throughput, high TPS application that inherits security from Ethereum. And there's phenomenal work being done by Eigenlayer and EigenDA and Celestia and Avail and a number of teams in helping the industry realize that vision. And I think we're seeing products that are on top of that stack gaining a ton of mind share right now. I think AltLayer is a phenomenal example of a team doing a great job implementing some tremendous primitives in the space. I would say that beyond the modular narrative, which I think is everyone's very excited about right now, the consumer narrative is something that I also find very exciting. In the last cycle, we saw consumer interest in NFTs at an all-time high, and I think that drove a bunch of new people to have an awareness of crypto who otherwise wouldn't, who might not care about this digital money, but would care about the digital art. And I think with this cycle, we're already starting to see consumer social be a strong driver of adoption. Farcaster being a tremendous example of that, as well as companies like Joker Race for Layer 3. And I think as we continue to see the maturation of these businesses, we're going to see a new genre of crypto users who become onboarded into the space and begin to explore more and begin to become involved in some of the potentially more emergent products. And then obviously, being a bag holder myself, I think the ZK narrative and the co-processor narrative is one that is going to be incredibly impactful. In particular, I think that given the go-to-market cycles of a lot of these products are slightly longer than some of the modular ones or the consumer ones, we're likely going to see an explosion towards the latter half of this year in consumer awareness and consumer excitement for that type of infrastructure. Because the things you can do once you now have abundant block space with more expressive block space built by co-processors is really going to be this powerful synergetic effect.
Super interesting. Okay, awesome. So if I can ask you maybe to put on your prognosticating hat or your prophecy hat here.
Yeah,
I'm always curious. This is another one of those recurring questions, but if I were to ask, the future of crypto is blank, how would you fill in that blank?
that's a good one. I can imagine blank can only be one word.
It can be whatever.
I would say bright, to be cliche. I think the future of crypto is this new tier of incredibly successful and talented operators and engineers, and obviously business people, marketers, etc., who are embracing the properties of Web3 in order to build products that are an order of magnitude better than what we've seen previously. And I think that as the quality of talent in crypto improves and increases, we're going to continue to see even better technology materialize off the back of their work. And I'm continually impressed, in particular from where we work with, which is often with the academic community, the awareness and the respect for the research that's being done in the industry by many of the teams in the industry, where you're now having academic work that's predicating parts of its experiments and parts of its research on things that were once originally originated from industry. And that is a exciting inflection in the space where we're seeing there be such a high quality of work being done by many of these teams that has now begun to permeate into the foundations of academia.
Love it. Super interesting. Okay. So one question I might have is maybe around like your most generalizable advice for early stage founders, because you've already given some great thoughts on who to pay attention to, right? There's conflicting voices sometimes, there's loud voices other times. But I'm curious if you had to maybe add one or two kind of almost parting thoughts here that would be useful for founders, what might you want to sort of anchor them around?
Yeah, I think you need to have conviction in what you build and why what you build will be impactful. And I think you need to, before you go out and raise a penny from anyone, before you go out and hire anyone or put any time into developing the business, you must first build that conviction yourself. And I think you build that conviction yourself by encountering and experiencing the problems that your solution solves. And then by talking with and working with other people in the space to make sure that your solution will actually solve those problems. And I think that type of discovery is essential for an operator to have confidence in what they're building as the correct solution for some problem in the space. And I think once you do that, the world opens up to you, because once you have conviction in what you do, it's much more easy to kind of translate that conviction to other people and to have them equally build conviction both in your solution and then in you as an operator.
That's great advice. Okay, awesome. So one last question here for you, or really kind of two questions in one. What is your team working on right now, and what's the best way for people to follow along in the journey?
Yeah. So we have some very exciting work coming out soon that really will take some of the co-processing narrative that's been developed over the last year and bring it to a big data scale and really start allowing big data scale computation to be run over on-chain state in a capacity that I think many developers right now are not aware of even possible. We're talking, 10,000, 20,000 storage slot proof with sub-minute compute. And so this is some of the stuff that our team will be coming out with on a testnet very, very soon. And for those who are interested, we'd love for you to stay in touch on our Twitter, which is at Lagrange Dev, or our website, which is lagrange.dev. And anyone should also, who's excited about this, feel free to reach out to me directly with my Twitter is at Ismael_H_R.
Perfect. Ismael, thank you so much for the time. This has been really, really fascinating. I can't wait to keep following along on the cool work Lagrange is up to, and I know it's going to be an exciting journey. So thank you for the time, and have a great start to your week here.
Thank you so much, Tanner. Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye-bye. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, go ahead and maybe give us a good 5-star rating and subscribe wherever you're getting your podcasts so you can get all the latest conversations with the most interesting crypto founders, investors, and builders from across the world. Thanks so much. Have a good one.